Good morning. My name is Stacy Simpson. I'm the Associate Director of Special Events for Northwestern Medill. We're so glad that you've tuned in with us today. During the program today, we ask that you submit questions in the Q&A section below, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible for each of the sections of our program today. Today's event is the result of collaboration of Medill with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung USA. I'd now like to welcome its director, Mr. Paul Linartz. Paul, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Stacy, and a very warm welcome to this online event, this webinar, New in News, Case Studies of Innovative Models in Local News. This online event is the latest in our ongoing collaboration with Northwestern University and the Medill School of Journalism. Last year, we looked at worldwide challenges to local media outlets in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and talked to some international experts about political and economic pressures on local news. Today we will take a look at the possible future of local news by highlighting some innovative models here in the United States. Bright spots, I may say, have emerged, and we will have the opportunity today to learn from 4 different case models, very interesting case models, spanning from urban and non-profit to smaller markets and for-profit media, including print, digital, and broadcast outlets. I want to thank our partner, Northwestern University and the Medill School of Journalism, and I want to especially thank Tim Franklin for his dedication and expertise he brings to this event. Tim is the Senior Associate Dean Professor and John M. Mutz Chair in Local News. Before joining Medill, he served as President of the Poynter Institute and as top editor at several metropolitan newspapers. With this, I'm handing over to Tim. The floor is yours, Tim.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for that kind introduction and for your introductory remarks. And thank you for the continued attention that your foundation has paid to the crisis in local news and its impact on democracies. We're grateful for that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. It's great to have you here this morning to talk about innovation in local news. My name is Tim Franklin. I'm the director of the Local News Initiative here at the Medill School at Northwestern University and the John M. Mutz Chair in Local News. This morning's session is not your typical panel discussion. Rather, we'll be doing successive individual deep dives on 4 bold new models in local news, ones that may be replicable elsewhere in the US, or that will at least spark new ideas for the future. First, some quick context to set the table for this morning before we head into the case studies. I suspect many of you on this webinar are painfully aware of the challenges gripping the local news industry. Just late last month, the Medill Local News Initiative at Northwestern published a State of Local News 2022 report led by my colleague, Penny Abernathy. It chronicled that more than 2 newspapers are lost on average every week in the US. 70 million Americans live in 208 counties with no local newspaper, and there's 1,630 counties with only 1 newspaper, and most of those are weeklies. Digital alternative news sources are growing, but they're not keeping up with the pace of newspaper losses. And the gap between communities with abundant local news and those without it is widening. Okay, that's the stark reality of local news in America. We're not here today to dwell on that, however. For the next 2.5 hours, we are going to dwell on other developments in the local news industry. They are ones of hope, of reinvention, and of transformation. They each represent very different new pathways for the future of local news. You're about to hear case studies, 30 to 40 minutes each, from the leaders of 4 news organizations around the country. They come from major cities and small towns. They come from legacy media and digital startups. They toil in print, digital, and broadcast local news. Two of them are nonprofits, two of them are for-profits. Two are digital only. The others are a combination of print, digital, and broadcast. We're going to go in depth with each of them individually about their bold experiments with new models for local news. And our aim is that you'll leave this webinar later this morning inspired with new ideas and inspired with potential new approaches for local news. For our 4 case studies this morning, you'll first meet the CEO and Chief Content Officer of Chicago Public Media and the CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times. Chicago's NPR station completed its acquisition of Chicago's scrappy tabloid newspaper in January and converted it to a nonprofit. The combined news organization is now the largest nonprofit local news outlet in America. Then you'll meet the executive director of Outlier Media in Detroit, which is employing text messaging to engage with readers and help drive its on-demand public service news and information journalism platform. Then we'll take a brief break. And after that, you'll hear from the editor and marketing director of the Richland Source, an innovative digital-only for-profit news site in North Central Ohio that's focused on solutions journalism. In its newsroom, it has developed a wide variety of revenue sources on its business side. Finally, you'll meet the publisher of The Pilot in Moore County, North Carolina. Way before most other publishers, he understood that he needed to diversify his small newspaper company if he was going to survive. Now his holdings include nearly 20 branded publications, products, and services, and he even bought the local bookstore. I can't wait to hear these leaders tell us their stories about creation and rejuvenation. This webinar is a product of the Medill Local News Initiative at Northwestern, a research and development program aimed at bolstering the sustainability of local news in America. It's supported by multiple foundations, companies, and individuals committed to sustaining local news. So now let's welcome the leaders of Chicago Public Media and the Chicago Sun-Times for our first case study. For the case studies, we've asked the leaders of each organization to give us a brief overview. That will then be followed by a moderated discussion with me. Then we'll turn to written questions that you can submit into the Q&A, and Stacy will be monitoring those throughout the program. So with that, let's dive into our first case study. Welcome and good morning to our speakers this morning. I'd like to introduce Matt Moog, is the CEO of Chicago Public Media. He joined Chicago Public Media in 2020 after having served on its board of directors for more than a decade. Previously, Matt was the founder and CEO of several innovative tech companies. Tracy Brown is the Chief Content Officer of WBEZ, where she leads the station's news operation of more than 40 editors, reporters, and producers for both digital and broadcast. She joined WBEZ in 2019 as managing editor after having served as deputy managing editor of the Atlanta Journal and Constitution. And last but not least, Nikia Wright is the CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times. Her professional experience includes strategic advisory and growth planning, operational turnarounds, and change and transformation. She's been a strategic advisor to MIT, Duke, and Dartmouth, and to Fortune 500 companies like McDonald's, Tyson Foods, and Toll Brothers. So Matt, Tracy, and Nikia, good morning and welcome to you. And the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you, Tim and Stacy and Paul and to Medill for hosting this, and to all of you who are attending. We're gonna, I'll speak for about 10 minutes, just to give you a brief introduction, and then turn it over to Tim to ask questions of myself and Tracy and Nikia. And the thing I'd like to say sort of right up front is we're gonna talk about some numbers and scale and sustainable revenue today. But we always like to ground our conversations in our mission, which is to tell the stories that matter for all of Chicago. And we root all of our planning and thinking about the future in the belief that journalism is the foundation for a participatory democracy. It's the foundation for a vibrant and healthy community. And we are committed to the important work that makes journalism both representative and inclusive of the community that it serves. And as an executive team, as an organization, we are inspired by the opportunity for innovation, for not just saving something for the past, but reinventing something for the future, thinking about how to employ solutions journalism and data journalism, engagement journalism, in the interest of telling the stories that matter. And we, as a nonprofit, we do believe that nonprofit public service journalism can restore trust and advance the public conversation, bring communities together, and inspire civic engagement. And that's really what drives us each day. If we can turn to the next slide here. Several years ago, when we sat down to think about our own future, we really developed the aspiration that you see on the screen in front of you. And this aspiration is one that has not always been the case for public radio and public media organizations across the country. In some ways, we had always complemented other news sources of record, but it became clear that the landscape was shifting dramatically. And because we had a sustainable financial model, because we had a reputation for quality, we had a trust of the audience, we had a very loyal supporters, we believed it was both an opportunity and an imperative that we start looking at ways to better serve the community. And if we can turn to the next page, that was in the context of something that all of you know all too well, that the legacy business models, particularly in Chicago, were fading, media consumption was shifting dramatically, but we were inspired by the fact that new models were emerging of all different types, and that there was an opportunity to be innovative in how we thought about the future. So if we can turn to the next page here, that's what really led to the combination of WBEZ and the Chicago Sun-Times. We were able to double the size of our newsrooms. We should end this year with about 200 people, which, as Tim mentioned, will be the largest nonprofit local newsroom in the country. We also doubled the size of our audience. We now reach more than 2 million people in Chicago every day, roughly 1 out of 3 people here. And that gives us an opportunity to have an impact in a way that we would not have been able to on our own. So if we can turn to the next slide here, what we would like to refer to as the Impact Flywheel are 4 pillars that I think are very familiar to all of you on this webinar, where you think about how does the content drive the audience, the loyalty, the diversity, the engagement of the audience, and how does that in turn support funding so that we can continue to hire and train and develop the best professionals in the field. And this flywheel then results in, for us, some detailed planning about what specific initiatives we'll undertake. So if we turn to the next slide here, the 4 core objectives that are based on these pillars are listed here. To become the essential, most trusted source for understanding the people, events, and ideas that shape our community. To grow the size, diversity, engagement of our audience. To strengthen membership and development. And to attract and retain and grow a diverse staff and provide them with equitable and inclusive development opportunities. If we go to the next slide, what we've done as an executive team and a larger leadership team, and really inclusively with the entire organization, is to think about what specifically we will do in each of those areas to make sure that we capitalize on the opportunity that we have to build a sustainable model for local journalism and to best serve our community. I'm sure both Tracy and Nikia will address several of these, but we wanted to at least show you some of the areas that we were focused in and that we're excited about. If you turn to the next slide here, what you'll notice is the 3 different examples that are illustrative of the potential of the combination of these 2 storied news organizations. We've been able to produce very impactful content that reaches larger audiences, that engages them in different ways. And each one of these have been done over the last 6 months. It's been 176 days since we made the acquisition. Not that we're counting or anything, but we're very pleased with the progress that we've made so far, and we're very optimistic about what the future holds. So if we turn to the next slide, the ways that we will measure the success of this effort is looking at the audience. Is the audience engaged? Are we having an impact? Are we reaching a truly representative cross-section of Chicago? Are we developing the kind of support that will allow us to build a long-term sustainable model? And we have specific ways of measuring these things, but also looking at overall engagement in the community with the content that we are creating. So that's the quick introduction to us as an organization, and we're happy to talk to Tim now and answer some of his questions.
Great, thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for that overview. So Matt, I'm going to start with you. Your new combined news entity is now the largest, as you said, the largest nonprofit local news organization in America. You reach more than 2 million people every week in broadcast, print, and digital. But this is a novel approach, putting together under one ownership umbrella a public radio news outlet and a legacy newspaper. And I think it's safe to say this is one of the most watched experiments in local news in the country right now. So I don't want to put any pressure on you or anything, but how's it going so far? Can you give us a status update?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially 6 months in, I would say it's going better than even expected. And as we've talked to our board about and others, we are beating our best case scenarios, which is really great. So if you look at the 4 dimensions that I listed on the content side, which I know Tracy will talk more about, we've had some very impactful collaborations. And very importantly, we've built relationships across the 2 newsrooms. We're getting to know each other, how to work together, and how to expand both the breadth and the depth of the work that we're doing. On the audience side, we've had several significant wins already in reaching more people. On the financial side, we've seen some additional success. And one of the areas that many people who have worked in newsrooms for a long time encourage us to think about how to best deal with change management and the people and culture side of things. And we've deliberately taken a slow but sure approach there. And I think that's also gone quite well. And we're looking forward to continuing to, in an iterative fashion, to work and make sure that integration continues to bear fruit.
Matt, could you talk in some specifics about how this acquisition in late January strengthens both organizations, both journalistically and financially?
Sure. So on the financial side of things, just from a revenue point of view, we essentially doubled the size of the organization overnight. And a couple of things to think about here is one, what a public media organization does bring to a previously for-profit organization is a strength and a history in raising philanthropic funds from both foundations and individuals. So WBEZ has been building those relationships over decades and decades, and some of that came to bear in this situation. So I think that's one very specific area. I think as many people know, we were able to secure multi-year commitments representing $61 million that both helped to fund some of the loss, but also, and very importantly, invest in the future infrastructure. So that second part of it is we're not just funding the existing operation, but we have a specific plan to provide investment capital to build out both the capabilities in the newsroom, on the digital side of things, to make sure that we're preparing ourselves for the future. And then the third part of this, from a financial point of view, also crosses over into providing access to new audiences, that as well as is improving the content itself and the product that the audience experiences. All of those three things have allowed us to think strategically and long-term and carefully and prudently about how to invest for the future.
I'd like to turn to Tracy and Nikia for a second. So yeah, you referenced the newsroom. You're operating, as I understand it, as two independent newsrooms, but you're collaborating on news coverage at the same time. And we just had this huge tragic story here in the Chicago area with the mass shootings in Highland Park. And I know that there was, saw that there was collaboration on that story. But could you talk about the extent to which you're collaborating on your news coverage and in your newsroom, and maybe give us an example or two of how that's going?
Sure, I'll take that one. So we are doing a lot of collaborations. I think since the start of the acquisition, we've actually had, collaborated more than, 100, 150 times. And in big ways and some small ways, we're collaborating, every day about, when I say collaborating, mean trying to, share this content, the stories that we each are working on individually, and then looking for opportunities that we can collaborate even beyond that. I will say that one of the most exciting things is that sometimes those collaborations really start from the reporter level. They know, for instance, that the politics team, if there's a press conference that the mayor is having, and they are talking to one another, trying to figure out who is doing what, so that there's not a duplication of efforts. And then we are collaborating on some bigger projects as well. In regard to the Highland Park shooting, that was like a huge story, not just locally, but nationally as well. It was great for us that Lynn Sweet, who's a reporter at the Washington bureau chief at the Chicago Sun-Times, actually just happened to be there, and just gave us all a huge advantage because we had a person on the ground. And then for us, it was about, the Sun-Times was able to get that story up pretty quickly, including with some images. And we kind of worked together to we're able to get that story on the website. But throughout the day, the editors were kind of talking to one another. Now, I will say it's an opportunity. For the most part, we were still kind of, operating as separate newsrooms, but sharing content and bringing Lynn on the air, but also taking stories from the Sun-Times. But I think it's a huge opportunity for us to think about how we, handle some of those big breaking news. And so we're actually going to be talking and creating a big breaking news plan so that, we're ready for some of those big stories. But then on the collaboration side for projects, when we cover the primary election a little over a month ago, that was just a huge opportunity for us to start thinking about how we're going to cover the elections, from the ground up. And so we got together and start talking about not just story ideas, but how we're going to, cover the day of and that sort of thing. So we created the election crib sheet but I think one of the biggest things, even with the voter's guide and the crib sheet, that we were really helping readers and listeners to kind of understand what was happening in that process. One of the biggest things that came out of that was we did this big poll story that actually, broke news that showed that the leading candidate on the GOP side was actually someone different than any of us thought. And that person ended up winning the GOP nomination. Had we not been talking earlier with each other, I don't think that story would have ever happened. But when we started having a big brainstorm about different things that we could try to do, putting our resources together to actually do a polling story, not just from the financial standpoint, but actually and how we were going to cover that story, ended up being a big exclusive opportunity for us. So I think you'll see more and more of that.
Yeah, I remember that poll story got a lot of attention here in Illinois, and as you say, really was predictive about the outcome. So can we now expect to see more multimedia and audio content from WBEZ on the Sun-Times site? Will we see more breaking news from the Sun-Times on the WBEZ site? Will we hear more Sun-Times journalists on WBEZ's airwaves. Could you talk a little bit about that cross-pollination and how that'll work?
Yeah, I would say yes to all of those. You will see more. In fact, one of the things that we're kind of experimenting right now is kind of creating a digital newscast in the coming months that will not only allow for the Sun-Times to have more audio content, but also for BEZ as well. So I think that you'll definitely see a lot more of the BEZ coverage, audio stuff. We're already sharing a lot of content between each other as well. Particularly, there's more breaking news on the BEZ site because the Sun-Times is just phenomenal at breaking news. And then for us on the BEZ side, and I'll go back to even talking about the Highland Park shooting. One of the things that we were able to do was to take advantage and leverage the strength that the Sun-Times has on breaking news coverage and the BEZ on doing more of the second day analysis so that actually strengthened our coverage in both of those areas. So definitely you'll be seeing more cross-pollination and the Sun-Times being on BEZ more on Reset and doing two-way conversations on WBEZ as well.
Yeah, that's exciting to think about, and we'll look forward to that. So Matt, in an interview after the announcement, you said that this acquisition of the Sun-Times represents an investment in the future growth for both WBEZ and the Sun-Times, and you projected hiring 40 to 50 new positions. Is that still on track, or are both newsrooms larger now than they were when the deal closed in January? Can you give us an update on that situation?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, still on track, and the newsrooms are larger. We actually, as part of our budgeting, we've budgeted for the next year to hire 60 total people. When I look back over how many new hires we've made since January, it's about 32. And if you look on both of our websites today, we have a total of 30 open positions posted right now. So we're very actively working on that. The majority of those are between our newsroom and our audience team.
And Matt, that's combined at both WBEZ and the Sun-Times, those 32?
That's correct. Yeah. So we expect to end the year with about 360 total roles at the organization.
Okay. And then one other quick follow-up. Have those been split kind of evenly between both news organizations, or one more than the other, or can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's a mix, and what we are, particularly on the audience team, we are building one integrated audience team that looks at the audiences across both and builds underlying both data and digital capabilities and marketing programs. So it's, but when you look at the combination of those things, the hiring is pretty evenly distributed across for that purpose.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that update, Matt. Nikia, can you talk about how this has changed the Sun-Times, this acquisition that happened in January? What are you doing differently now than what you were doing pre-acquisition? Just kind of explain for us how things have changed there.
Absolutely. So one, thank you so much for the invitation. Two, on a personal note, I'm happier than I've been professionally over the last 5 years, given the sort of gloom and doom that you mentioned in the beginning. We were certainly in the lion's den as it relates to that. Post-merger, though, I'll steal the words from Tracy Brown just a minute ago. The first time in our history, we get to say readers and listeners. We have new investment partners. We have new thought partners, people who are incredibly engaged in figuring out how we're going to take this journey towards solution advancement for this incredible city. I think every month or 6 weeks, we have new news to share. Over the last, I want to say 7 weeks, we got our first female executive editor in the history of our organization. I don't want to stress too much that she's a female. I will stress that she is a rock star. And so when you think about how we are going forward, how we're trying to engage in the community, we've got a new leader with new initiatives, new perspective, new viewpoints that's really going to take us into that next chapter and partner with BEZ in ways that, quite frankly, we have not even been able to scratch the surface on. As it relates to the temperature of our company, they're also really, really excited because now we get to talk about a future. When most people talk about the Chicago Sun-Times, they really talk about the people of the past and they give names of people of the past. Now we get to plan for our future and start talking about a brand for the future, and journalists who are also going to be as big a name recognition as people that we remember from our past. So we're on good footing.
That's great to hear. Matt, one interesting aspect of this combination is that WBEZ and the Sun-Times have different audience bases for the most part. You're both region-wide news organizations for sure. WBEZ is especially ubiquitous on the north side of Chicago and in the northern suburbs. The Sun-Times has a very strong presence on the south and west sides of Chicago and in the south and southwest suburbs. So is this a unique opportunity for both BEZ and the Sun-Times to expand their audience bases? And if so, how do you plan to do that?
Sure. Well, yes, I think it's absolutely a great opportunity, and it is part of the premise of this combination. And I'll share with you the different ways that we've looked at this and the information that we've collected. Over the last summer, when we were considering this combination, we fielded a survey of about 2,000 Chicagoans, and we wanted to understand awareness, usage, trust across the major news sources in Chicago. And one of the things that we found was that the level of awareness of the Sun-Times brand was significantly higher than WBEZ, and it reached into a more diverse communities than WBEZ did on its own. When we looked at the subscriber and member base overlap among the top 10 zip codes for each, what we found was that there was no overlap, that we were reaching very different audiences. And to put a number on it for you, what we found is that 10% of Sun-Times readers listen to WBEZ, and 26% of Sun-Times 26% of WBEZ listeners read the Sun-Times. What that says to me is there's a huge opportunity to expose the good work of both organizations to new audiences, but there's also an opportunity to improve the existing products we have, to introduce new products, to cover a broader range of topics, and to cross-promote and distribute content. So some of the projects that Tracy talked about, not only did we have over 15 people from across both newsrooms working together, crossing disciplines such as data journalism, visual journalism, engagement journalism, but we also, it was a front page story on the Sun-Times. It was on the website. It was featured in our emails. It was on our midday talk show called Reset. All of those things happened in coordination. And we both had a level and a quality of reporting that we couldn't have done on our own. And we also were able to double the size of the audience. And long term, if we can pair together awareness and usage with trust and really emerge as the most trusted news source in Chicago, that's really where we realize the full potential of the combination.
Right. Nikia, let me ask you. Matt referenced earlier that when the deal closed, it was announced that $61 million had been raised, and then most of that was multi-year commitments pledged over 5 years. It's no secret that the Sun-Times, like virtually every other metro news organization in the country, has been grappling with major financial headwinds in recent years. So does this acquisition mean the Sun-Times is now financially stable between now and 2027, beyond 2027? And if so, what are your long-term business strategies beyond that? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so I think Matt and I would answer this slightly differently. Matt, being my board chairman, can use the word stable all day long. But us in the organization, keeping our boots on the ground, we don't like to think of things as stable because we are continuing to try to meet that goal of being the most trusted news organization in the city. So the board can use that. We look at that as where are we going to make those strategic investments for growth. We are doubling down on what it means to be a truly digital organization. The Chicago Sun-Times over the last 20 or so years has used the word digital, but not in the sense that we think about it, where we were showing, putting our money where our mouth was and really showing strategic investment in that area. And so with the help of BEZ, certainly Tracy, an incredible chief audience officer, we have high aspirations for focusing much more on our digital membership model, but we will not be ignoring our print subscribers who do enjoy that product on a daily basis.
Okay, and then one other question having to do with print frequency. 42 of the 100 largest newspapers in the country now deliver a print edition 6 or fewer times a week, according to some recent research that we've done here at Medill. Will the Sun-Times join the ranks of those not printing 7 days a week?
So the short answer is a smart executive will always keep all options on the table. But based upon what Matt and Tracy alluded to, we are in the habit building and not the habit breaking business right now. When you talk about how we were able to punch well above our weight class and double the size of our newsroom, I would ask, of those 40 some odd publications, how many of them were growing their newsroom and growing their content? If I'm growing my newsroom, if I'm growing my audience, if I'm using content from WBEZ, it stands to reason that we have a lot more stories to tell in creative ways. And therefore, we want to continue building that habit as opposed to breaking it. Now, 6-8 months from now, we'll certainly reconsider that. But we also do have some anecdotal evidence showing that we are taking subscribers from the 4-day subscription to the 7-day. And that has really been incredible because of some of the content and increase in quality, longer form, longer stories, explainer journalism that we have been able to use from BEZ. So we are habit building, not breaking right now.
Okay, all right, that's good to hear. So a couple more quick questions, and then we'll see if we have questions in the chat. I know Stacy's monitoring the Q&A and the chat for audience questions. But a couple of questions that I'm sure everyone on this webinar today are interested in hearing about. Can this model, the combination of public radio and legacy newspaper, can this work in other markets in the US and beyond? What do you think?
So I would say certainly the core concept of local news organizations coming together and leveraging their respective assets, whether it's their news reporting capacity or their audience or their ability to produce revenue, and finding ways of making it sort of 1 + 1 = 3, I think is something that every responsible news organization should be looking at. I will say, as a nonprofit organization, we are leaning heavily into partnerships and collaborations and looking for ways to be a good supportive partner in the larger, very active media and journalism ecosystem in Chicago. But both Tracy and Nikia and myself, we've all fielded a number of calls from markets large and small across the country of media organizations and their boards, and public media organizations and others looking for exploring alternatives in a range of ways and looking to learn from what we're doing. We are very committed to being very open and transparent and sharing with the larger community what's working, what's not, how we're adjusting, what we're learning, and how we get to the end goals that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think we have seen in other markets around the country some collaborations between legacy newspapers and public media. This is the first I'm aware of where there's actually an ownership combination of the two, which makes this especially unique. And it sounds like it's generating a lot of interest around the country from the phone calls you've been getting. So that's great. So let's, we have a couple of minutes left, and let's turn to the Q&A or the chat to see if there are any questions from the audience before we go. Okay, this is from audience participant John Frank. He says 61 million over 5 years does not sound like enough to fund an organization the size you're talking about. Where is other funding coming from, and how stable is it?
So I can address some of that, and then Nikia can feel free to jump in as well. But what's interesting to me is the typical public media funding model counts on about 45% of revenue coming from members. And WBEZ has about 87,000 members. It also counts on what in the public media world we call sponsors, corporate sponsors, but in the traditional commercial world are referred to as advertisers. And that typically represents about 20% of revenue. And then typically about 20% of revenue comes from philanthropic foundations and individual major donors. That same similar mix exists here. So when you look at the combination, we have close to 200,000 people in Chicago who are either members or subscribers, and we think there's an excellent opportunity to build on that. And one of the major initiatives that we have that we know has some risk associated with it, but we're very committed to it, is to roll out a membership program. We're going to drop the paywall for the Chicago Sun-Times and launch a membership program that will count on voluntary contributions to support the journalism. And our goal over the next 5 years is to reach 100,000 digital members. And we're very interested in collaborating with other news organizations across the country who are interested in doing something similar to learn from their efforts as well.
Okay, and then I'm going to try to, we're at time. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question real quick. This is from Elise Simmons. What marketing strategies are you utilizing to sustain current digital subscribers and increase digital membership with new subscribers? And executing this strategy, what marketing challenges have you found?
I'll take that, but again, invite anybody else to comment on that. But the quick answer is we've been more in planning and hiring for the digital membership side. But I will tell you, and this is something that we feel pretty strongly about, is that the path to getting to where we need to be has to do with building relationships with our audience, and specifically addressable relationships that are rooted in trust and rooted in a daily habit, and really thinking about how we build that trust and that reliance among our audience. So getting the audience to do things like register on the website, sign up for an email, download a mobile app, all of those kinds of things will help us build that. Today, we have about 600,000 people who have done so. We're looking to take that over the next 5 years into the millions of people that we have a direct and addressable relationship with. And we do think that will help both on the sponsorship and advertising side, as well as the ability to encourage people to become members and supporters.
Okay. Nikia, Tracy, did you want to add anything to that?
The one thing I would add on to that is important to doing the things that Matt just talked about in community is really community engagement. So we have increased, we created a new community engagement team that is really trying to help us to build those relationships on the ground. So, that is at the heart of it. And so we're doing, we have a 5-person team now that is working across both organizations to really kind of, if we look at some of the stories that we did on, whether it's water debt, it's not just about putting those stories on the website or on the air, but us building the relationships and actually going out into the community and doing workshops to help people to understand, resources that are available to them, and the heart of the story. So we're really going to be using community engagement to help us to reach people as well.
That's great. Okay, well, Matt, Tracy, Nikia, thank you so very much for your time this morning. It's been a very illuminating session. You've got a lot going on, and we certainly wish you all the best. And good luck with things.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, so now we're going to move to our next case study. I'm really excited about this one as well. So I'd like to welcome Candice Fortman from Outlier Media to join us for our next case study. Candice is the executive director of Outlier Media in Detroit. Before joining Outlier, Candice was the marketing and engagement manager at WDET, the NPR station in Detroit. Perhaps you knew the folks from WBEZ, Candice, when you were there.
Very excited. That was awesome for me to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. In addition to her work at Outlier, Candice is the host of Newsguest, a podcast produced by the local independent online news publishers that explores newsroom sustainability. So Candice, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's great to have you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your story at Outlier. So as with the other case studies, I'll turn it over to you for kind of a quick overview of what's going on there, and then we'll dive into the Q&A.
Yeah. So here we're starting right off with our mission. By keeping residents first, we hope to give more than we take and leave people with the information they need to create change in their own communities. So Outlier was founded in 2016 by Sarah Alvarez while she was doing the JSK Fellowship at Stanford. And we were both working in two separate NPR stations, public radio stations. She was at Michigan Radio at the time. And we were both dealing with this sort of same question. How do we best inform people who don't need information in order to keep them entertained or to become smarter, but in order to get them out of crisis? What is the best delivery method to do that? And also, how do you find out what information people need to know in order to survive in a city or in a place? And so while she was at JSK, she developed a methodology, which is the methodology that we use to this day. And we can go to the next slide, which allows us to answer sort of this why. If journalism serves those with the highest and most difficult to fill information needs, it can serve all. Journalism is civic infrastructure. And when we say that, we mean that information, and we can call it journalism, but really information is as valuable as being able to turn on the lights in your house. And many of us understand that now after going through and living inside of what is the current COVID crisis. Remember those early days when you did not know how to navigate this new world. Many people are living in those sort of crisis of information all the time. And so how can we best get information to people who need information to survive? And then collaboration is the future of journalism, which is why I was so excited to hear that last session, because I think that really hits on that point. And then we can build newsrooms that value the lives of the people it serves and the people employed therein. So at Outlier, we're not just trying to build an organization that better serves the people, our audience, but also is good to the people who do the work of journalism. Outlier is led by myself and Sarah, so a Black woman and a Mexican woman who have had very interesting experiences working in the news industry, not all of them pleasant. And so we want to make sure that we're building an organization that values the lives of the people that we have on our team. So we can go to the next slide. We started out in 2016, where it was just Sarah, like I said, and no money. So this was not a startup that, with $1 million investor behind it. This was Sarah saying, this is a valuable work that is so important that it must be done by any means necessary. And so it took a while for us to get up and running. I joined the organization in 2019 as the executive director. And I'll tell you, it was kind of reluctantly. I was nervous. I didn't think that, I didn't know if I had the chops to get this done. When I walked in the door on day one, there was $72,000 in the bank, and we had no clue where the next dollar was going to come from. But today we have grown the organization to 10 full-time staff members with an operating budget of about $1.4 million this year. And it will be somewhere around $2 million next year. All of that growth, I will tell you, happened after after 2020. And so if you can take yourself back to 2020 and think about what was going on, of course, there was an information crisis happening. So many funders for the first time themselves understood what it felt like to live inside of an information gap. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about what an information gap is a little later here. But also, I would be reluctant if I did not say also the murder of George Floyd and the influx of cash that fell into the laps of Black and Brown-led organizations thereafter has also contributed to our growth. And it's important that I state that because we know that that has a timeline. And if we're not thinking about how to shore up organizations that serve Black and Brown audiences when there is not a crisis like that, then we're doing ourselves in those communities a disservice. And I think we can get into that a bit later. So we can go to the next slide and I can talk a little bit about how the service works. So before we built a website, we built an SMS text message platform. So Outlier is, of course, like I said, a crisis communication newsroom at its base. And so we built this SMS service so that Detroiters can access quality information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. All of this information that is in this text service is reported information, done by with information that has been looked up by reporters, right down to checking to make sure that the phone numbers that we give in for city services or other community organizations, that those phone numbers actually work. And the reason this SMS service was really valuable to us before a website was valuable for us is that if you are living in an immediate crisis, 2,000 words is often not very useful. What you need to know is what number do you call, what form do you fill out? And often people are coming to us because they need someone to affirm that they are making, that they're calling the right department, and also to say, hey, I'm calling these people and no one is answering the phone, or I'm filling out this form and they're telling me that this, service that's supposed to help me pay my rent actually doesn't have any more funding left. And so people can text this number, like I said, 24 hours a day, but it's also available in Spanish, Arabic, and in English, which are the languages most spoken in the metro area. We program that text message service by first doing an information needs assessment that allows us to ask Detroiters what if they had a reporter working with them for the next 24 hours, what they would have them look up for them. And we also look at public record information like non-emergency 911 calls to United Way to see what people are asking questions about and what they're complaining about. We also look at a number of other data points, including some census tract data, in order to find out where the information gaps for Detroiters are exist. And those information gaps are what become our beats of reporting. So we really think of it this way, that Detroiters are our assignment editors. We're looking at what information they need to know first, and that is the reporting that we go out and do. We take the resources that we get from donors and foundations and other areas, and we apply it to those information gaps. We can go to the next slide. We also have now built a full website. It launched this year, but we also have 3 newsletter products. We earlier this year merged another local organization, Detour Detroit, into our newsroom. So we maintained their newsletter, which is really about connecting to community. How do we better understand Detroit? How do we connect to our community and to our neighbors? Detroit Documenters. Documenters is an incredible program that is coming out of Chicago and City Bureau. And Detroit Documenters are residents that are trained and paid to go to public meetings and to take notes at those public meetings that are then edited by reporters and editors in our newsroom and other newsrooms and used as public record for both reporting and also for all other sorts of community needs. We have about 340 Detroiters trained as documenters currently. And then the Dig is our housing and development newsletter, but really housing and development from a very different standpoint. We are not talking about housing and development from the point of view of big developers, but really from the community level, and really talking about how housing and development impacts residents of the city of Detroit. And then we do a lot of how-to guides, like this one on land contracts. And because we saw that there was a lot of scamming happening in the land contract system. Detroit is a cash housing market. Most people buy their houses here in cash. It is very difficult to get a mortgage in Detroit. And so we do a lot of how-to guides about how to protect yourself when buying a house in cash, how to protect yourself when you're buying houses in different ways, and really looking at how do we help Detroiters best navigate how to live in the city, how to survive the city, but eventually how to thrive in the city. So from the SMS service, you really look at that as that first level of really trying to survive in the city. And as you move up our, what most folks would call an audience funnel, what we call an audience pathway, we're trying to move people along that pathway. So if we can move you out of that SMS service and get you out of crisis, perhaps we can help you become a Detroit documenter. And maybe then you could become a volunteer and do some work with Detour Detroit, because we do volunteer events with Detour Detroit. And then perhaps even in some cases, we have some of our documenters who are now even becoming freelance writers for us and finding ways to help connect to community. So we had a Detroit documenter who created a how-to guide for us on how to start a block club in your neighborhood. So it's really about helping people to understand that journalism does not sit in an ivory tower. It is available and accessible to anyone. That is something that we can train people to understand how it serves them, but also perhaps help them become a part of the system of service. So that was a lot of information, and I think there's a lot more to talk about, but I'll leave it there so that we can have a really healthy conversation, Tim.
Candice, thank you very much for that. And congratulations on all your growth in such a short period of time. And I love the human-centered, community-centered approach that you're taking to the news that you're delivering, the information that you're delivering to your community. Can you talk, and by the way, before I dive into my questions, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll be getting to those here in a couple of minutes. But could you talk a little bit about the idea for this? You touched on it briefly in your presentation, but this is so novel. It's such a different approach to covering a community. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of this?
Sure. So I always say that before Outlier was an organization, it was a model for reporting. Outlier at its heart is a model for how we can better serve communities and really address immediate information needs. So Sarah Alvarez, our founder, was off at JSK and was looking at how do we, figure out what information people need to know. And so one of the things that she found quite interesting was how Google designed the search functionality, right? So now when you type into Google and you hit like restaurants, immediately sees restaurants near me, because it has learned over time to assume what you need. And all of that was learning. And the way that they figured out how to do that is that they would survey people basically every single day. So in the beginning, like if you were searching in Google, they would ask you a question. So I see you're searching for restaurants. Are you looking for restaurants to go on a trip? Are you looking for restaurants in your neighborhood? They were trying to learn from what people were trying to anticipate people's information needs. And so clearly we did not have the resources or the knowledge bank of something like Google, but Sarah really understood that there was a way to translate that down to the community level. We do a lot of surveying in journalism, and it's a lot of great surveying, but what we were trying to get was a little bit past the survey level and really look at how do you use public record information? How do you use indirect conversations with people to figure out what it is that they need to know? So those information needs assessments, which is how we do that work. We do those once a year, and we do them also for other communities as consultants, but mostly we do them in Detroit because that is how we decide where our resources go, our reporting resources and our financial resources for our editorial work. And it has allowed us to sort of take ourselves out of the process in a way, and to really be able to center the needs of Detroiters. So in the beginning, it was the information needs for Detroiters was almost always housing and utilities. Like I said, Detroit is a city where most people need to buy a house in cash. It is also a city that in the last 10 years was once the city with the highest rate of Black ownership in the country. And in the last really less than 10 years, it has become a city where most people are renting their homes. That's a very different housing market than most of us grew up in. And so that also opens up the door for a lot of scams, and a lot of nefarious acts. So really trying to help people, like really trying to understand what people need to know about the housing market, what they need to know about the utilities market. Because, you know, if we were to make assumptions based on, for instance, what our colleagues were publishing, we would assume that Detroiters' utilities needs were all about water. We've learned a lot about the water crisis in Detroit, thousands of shutoffs of water. And what we came to learn was that actually there was a bigger issue on the electric and gas side of the utilities market, which is something that we might have ignored had we not been in conversation with Detroiters and really looking at that public record information to figure out what they were asking questions about. And that is the basis of how we build out the reporting. And again, not starting with the website because we knew it would not be useful to the folks we were trying to serve. And also though, when we needed to do investigative and accountability reporting, particularly in the beginning, we did that in partnership with larger newsrooms because we knew that those stories needed to be uplifted to the policy level, to folks that had the ability to be able to make change for the folks that were being harmed by bad systems. So collaboration and partnership have been key to our growth. I think it has allowed us to come into the market a little bit easier because we were always working in collaboration with our larger partners. Even to this day, we actually share a reporter with the Detroit Free Press. So we do a pay share for her salary. She works part-time for the Free Press and part-time for us, being edited by 2 editors in 2 different newsrooms and really allowing us to have deep collaboration, particularly on the housing and development side.
So Candice, I have a ton of questions and a couple of follow-ups about what you were just saying about texting and collaboration. I'm going to get to those, but it strikes me that, I mean, the way you're engaging with the community is unique and a different approach. But in many ways, it also strikes me that what you're doing is good old-fashioned public service journalism that serves a community, right? And that's why local news should exist.
Yeah. I'll tell you that one of Sarah's favorite things in the world is Consumer Reports. She might be the last person who is deeply dedicated to Consumer Reports. And a lot of our thinking comes from that idea, right? Like, you know, a lot of the work they were doing was like that meat and potatoes information, not, you know, long form, but like, is this the best fan to buy? Right? Like, and here's the reason why it is or isn't. But for us, this is also in a lot of ways an homage to a city and a people who have always done this work to some degree for themselves. So though Detroit is a city that still has 2 daily newspapers operating in it, 4 TV stations, 2 public radio stations can be heard in Detroit, and a number of other digital startups. I think that there are still communities in this city that are not centered in news production. Right. And when they are centered, it's often because there is something that has happened to that community or inside that community, as opposed to really thinking about what they need in order to be in community. So I always say that I grew up as a Block Club kid. My mother was Block Club president for many years. My grandmother was the secretary. And so I spent my whole life inside of a community meeting, basically. And when I think about the work of those Block Clubs, I see a lot of synergy between the work that we do at Outlier and what Block Clubs and many other organizations have been doing in the city when no one cared about their information needs in the same way. And I also think about for many years, there was a courthouse here called Recorder's Court. And there was a group of retired women who would go into that court every single day and take handwritten notes to give to folks who were on trial, because at that time it was actually outlawed for folks on trial to bring in pen and paper. So that meant that you couldn't take notes for your own case, right? And so these women would take these notes and make them available to the families and defendants in these cases. A lot of that is, you know, when I think about Detroit documenters, I see a straight line to that work and what documenters do. So we're not creating anything new. We're bringing in all of it into one roof, basically, and also making sure that we have resources that help people to get this work done.
Sure. Could you give us an example of one story that emerged from your interactions with the community, and then talk a little bit about the impact that story had?
Absolutely. I think one thing I missed in talking about the SMS system is that we do a lot of our sourcing out of that service. So often, people are bringing us stories that we would have not heard otherwise. They're trying, because they're like, hey, can you help me figure out this? But then when 15 people ask that same question, you start to see a trend happening. And one of those trends that we started to see a few years ago was in the rental market. So, and we talk about that land contract, that how-to guide on land contracts. So there was a woman who was going to purchase a home, and it was through a land deed. So she would pay rent on the house for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, per her agreement with the landlord, she would then own the house outright. The house, when she got into it, was basically gutted. So she was also responsible for bringing it back up to a livable situation. She did that with her savings and her own money in her own hands, laying the pipes in the basement herself, putting down flooring. And this was a senior citizen who was going through this. At the end of those 2 years, she reaches back out to the landlord for her last payment and says, okay, so when can we turn the title over? She's seen the title, they shown her the title, and all of a sudden the phone numbers didn't work. The emails weren't being returned. What we come to learn is that they never actually owned that house. Someone who owned the house was in California and had no idea that this woman was living in this house.
Wow.
So all the money she had invested in that home was about to be lost. And the case ends up going to trial, and we end up getting that story through the SMS service. And that becomes an investigative story that we did in partnership with NBC News. And it ended up becoming one of their highest performing pieces of last year. But that came first by someone sending us a text message and saying, hey, I'm having a problem. And also her house was saved, by the way. And the city council also opened up an investigation, which is now putting in new legislation to protect folks to make sure that's not happening.
Great. That was my next question. So she's still in the house.
She's still in the house.
Okay.
Actually, one of the readers reached out to us and we connected her to a housing coalition service, and she actually donated the money to buy the house for the woman.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions I want to make sure I get in, and again, invite folks to leave questions in the Q&A. But what gave you the idea to use text messaging in this form? And were you worried about people's responses to being hit up on their phones?
I will tell you what I tell everybody. We don't do it because it is cheap, and we don't do it because anyone is investing anything in it. It is a dying technology for the most part. The reason we use text message is because, particularly at this time, this is pre-2020, the Detroiters we were most trying to reach, which were low-income Detroiters, when we looked at the data, they were the rates of Wi-Fi and broadband access were somewhere under 50%, which meant that the folks that we wanted to get were not going to go to a website, right? It was not the best way to be in communication with them. And so really SMS is about being able to reach folks that might be difficult to reach via the internet. And it has for us been a mixed bag. I'll tell you that we have about 800,000 people subscribed currently to our SMS service. And we talk about subscription, we mean people who have gotten a message from us and have not said, stop texting us, right? There's about 700,000 people in Detroit. So that's also covering some of the Metro Detroit region, because we have started to sort of broad out our reach to some of the inner ring suburbs. But I think when you are able to present people with quality information, we don't spam them. We're not in constant communication. I think a lot of people think that what we're doing is like texting out long form articles. We don't do that. This is really about getting you useful information that you can put into action. We're really about creating actionable information. And so if people are actually able to use the service and they aren't being spammed by it, and we're not selling their phone numbers to someone else, it builds a sort of trust and rapport. And I think, Tim, the thing that helps us most, and the thing I'm always most proud of, is that if someone uses the service because their house is facing tax foreclosure, which is the #1 reason people lose houses in Detroit, is to tax foreclosure. If they use that service and they're able to get information that protects their house, the next thing they do is that when their mother is in that same situation, they say, hey, I use this service, you should use it, or a cousin or a friend. That is how you build trust. You build trust by actually being good and being rigorous in your work. And when you're rigorous and good at your job, people appreciate it and they will become your voice for you. So we watch people, tell other folks, tell cousins, and say, like, we get text messages like, my cousin says she used this service to get her water bill paid or to figure out how to read her water bill. Can you help me? And that for me is always sort of the best possible endorsement, better than any possible endorsement we can get from the industry for sure.
Yeah, you're building trust through, and I was thinking about this as I was reading about your work, but you're creating this kind of virtuous loop of
Exactly.
listening, responding, and helping.
That's right. It's a feedback loop. It is intentional. And I have to say that feedback loop is intentional. We want to make sure that at every level of production of news in our organization, that there's a way for the community to be a part of that production, but also be in communication with us about it. From our newsletters to the SMS service to Detroit Documenters, we always want to make sure that there's a way for folks to get back to the newsroom. We are not hiding from our community. We want them to reach out to us. We want them to tell us when we got it right, and we want them to tell us when we got it wrong. And trust me, they do. But that's really important, right? Like, it's really important that they know that we are not doing this and assuming that we have all the answers, that in fact, we actually believe that they know more than we do, and that we just have a skill set that allows us to present the information in a way that serves a general audience. And that's really the real, secret to journalism, I think.
Right. Candice, I'm sure I could talk to you all day, but I have a couple more questions before we have to close out. So you're the executive director. So you also have to make sure the math works for the sustainability of the organization. Could you talk a little bit about your business model and ultimately, how that works toward long-term sustainability?
Yeah. So I have to laugh at this because I also host a podcast about newsroom sustainability, but I don't actually believe in it. That's a whole nother thing. They know I don't. So when I say I don't believe in sustainability, I don't believe that we will be able to business model our way out of the crisis of the back end of journalism. And I'm willing to be wrong about that. And I don't think that's true for every newsroom. I don't think it's true for the Texas Tribune, for instance. I do think it is true for organizations like Outlier, who are serving an audience that cannot afford to pay for the news, but they absolutely need access to good information, which means that to some degree, organizations like Outlier will need to be subsidized. Where that's subsidized, who's subsidizing it is a conversation we can certainly have. We can talk about the federal government, we can talk about foundations and large donors. And I think that all of them will have a role, and all of them currently do have some role in these systems. But for now, the way we're thinking about it is by building a general audience strategy, which is something that we did not immediately start doing. Again, we started right at crisis, and that was the only audience that we were focused on. So when you see something like the merger with Detour, that was a strategic business decision, because we knew that we needed to broaden our scope, and to really, especially if we were going to build a donor base, we needed to have folks to come in that needed information in a different way, still using that model and methodology. So even at that thriving level information, we still want to know what information people need to know in order to connect to community. So one of the things that we saw, for instance, with Detour readers is that they really were coming, inside the pandemic, feeling very disconnected from the city. So what information can we provide to them that helps them connect to the city? And in return, how can they support our work? We're developing really rich partnerships with local business organizations, particularly small organizations, and really thinking about ad revenue. When we brought in Detour, Ashley Woods Branch, who founded Detour, has joined us as our revenue growth director. So she's really thinking about how do we grow revenue in interesting ways, like partnerships and corporate partnerships and events and the like. And then there is, of course, donations. And we have been growing our donation money, I would say, by at least 20% year to year. And now that I think Detour is a part of our mix, I can't wait to see what year end looks like for us. I'm actually really excited about it.
Yes. So to recap, it's really a whole combination of different revenue sources, from individual donations to foundations to sponsorships and the like. So it's really a diversified business model.
As much as we can diversify it. And I'm actually even hearing myself talk about it and thinking about in 2019 when we're first starting, this sounds like a miracle to my ears, because this was a time when we could not even get foundations to give us, a real investment. And now we're having very different conversations with foundations about how they can support this work.
That's great. And so one question I'm asking everybody this morning in these case studies is your model replicable elsewhere in the country, do you think?
Absolutely. And we know that it's replicable, and we're actually working now on building some technology that will allow because we don't want to go run Outliers in other places. I want to say that on the record very clearly. The reason Outlier is successful in Detroit is because Detroiters operate and run it. We know this community and love this community. I always say that the information is important to me because I know my aunt is reading it, and that matters to me. And so for us, it's about how can we best give people the back end solutions that we use in order to be able to build what they're doing in their community. But I also think, for instance, that SMS is not going to be the solution for everybody. I look at something like Southerly, an incredible organization serving the South, where they've been doing hand printed newsletters that they pass out at libraries, because in the rural South, that's a better way to get to people. And for me, that's the same thing that Outlier is doing, right? Take SMS out of it. It just happens to be the way. I joke all the time that if I thought pigeon carriers would get people good information, I would be investing in a pigeon farm right now. It's about getting people the information they need, where they need it, in the best possible way to deliver it.
Are you getting phone calls, interest from others around the country?
Oh, yes. Lots of phone calls, lots of interest. We have actually helped another newsroom build a similar system to what Outlier has. Milwaukee 414, which Wisconsin watched, the investigative newsroom there,
Right.
Got a Google grant in order for us to build for them. We built that system in 2019, and it is still up and operating. We've also done information needs assessments with communities across the country, from Delaware to New Jersey and Memphis and Fresno, California.
Okay, that's great. So you want to break news? Do you know where the next Outlier might be, or Outlier-like organization might be?
I have no idea.
Okay, all right.
I would imagine, though, that there is, I'll say this, I don't know this for sure, but I do think, based on the interest and conversations that we're having now, that there is a chance that in some way we will help build something, and not run it, help build it, help, with this strategy in West Michigan. That is still an area of the state that is underserved by journalism, and particularly in the Black and Brown communities in that region.
Right. Okay, great. We will look for that in West Michigan. Thank you. Well, we are at time. So Candice, I'm going to let you go, but this is so fascinating. It's really interesting to hear about your work and your model and the growth that you're experiencing at Outlier. And we'll be looking for potentially others around the country. So Candice, thank you so very much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Tim.
You bet. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break to give you all a chance to stretch. And we will come back at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock Central Time with our friends from the Source in Ohio. And we'll be hearing about the incredible work that they've been doing with solutions journalism and diversifying their business model in Richland. So back at you 9 minutes from now. We'll see you then. All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's great to have you with us. It's very energetic music and then very mellow music there as we go into this next session. So thank you again for being with us this morning for what's been a fascinating morning so far about new models in local news. And I'm especially excited about the conversation that we're about to have with the Richland Source and Source Media and the work that it's doing in North Central Ohio around solutions journalism, as well as its innovative business model. So let's dive in. I'm going to start by introducing our guests from Richland. Larry Phillips is the editor of Richland Source, Ashland Source, and Knox Pages. He began as managing editor in 2015. Richland Source has won multiple national awards for its solutions journalism, reporting, and innovation. Before joining the Source, Larry worked for 25 years as an award-winning reporter, sports writer, and editor, the majority of that time for Gannett. So Larry, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. And also joining us is David Yoder. He's a founding member of the Source Media team and is currently the Senior Advertising and Marketing Manager. He specializes in audience development tactics, tech partnerships, ads, and sponsorship. David coaches for Lions Revenue Growth Fellowship Program. So it sounds like, David, you've already been spreading the word about best practices when it comes to growing revenue. So again, congratulations to both of you on all the work that you've been doing, and really looking forward to flushing this out. I'm going to turn it over to you so you can do give us some background on what's going on there, and then we'll dive into the questions. So Larry and David, take it away.
Thanks, Tim. We really appreciate it. It's an honor to be invited to Medill's program here. And we had a little bit of a relationship with a couple of Medill grad students, I believe it was last year. They came here to Richland Source and produced a documentary about Richland Source. And we sent them to Knox Pages, one of our sister sites. And while they were there, they participated or took video of the Danville Raccoon Festival. So they really got a flavor of North Central Ohio up close and personal. But we had a really good experience with them, and we're very excited to be here. Just to tell you a little bit about Richland Source, we were founded in 2013 by a local businessman, Carl Ferniak. We became North Central Ohio's only online-only news source. And his reason for founding us was that he believed the community was seeing itself through the front page of the local legacy newspaper, which was and still is the Mansfield News Journal, which is a Gannett daily here in town, very strong, very deep roots in the community. But its coverage was largely based on the front page anyway, on crime and courts. And Carl felt the community was seeing itself as kind of a negative place to be. And really his reason for founding Richland Source was to combat that perception. And so kind of on the back of a cocktail napkin, he came up with the idea of starting an online only news agency. And it took a little while to gain some traction. About a year and a half, David actually could talk better about it because he was one of the founding employees. But after about a year and a half, we found our footing a little bit and brought in some veteran news hounds, packaged them with some young, energetic, aggressive reporters. And really the culture was a big part of the reason we were able to kind of advance, was because we did have people locally who were interested in the news and who were educated in journalism, and got really lucky in that regard. Because we have a largely homegrown news team, and they live here, they're invested in the community, and our readers recognize that. So what we set forth to do was shift kind of the focus of the news coverage in the community. Instead of focusing on the 5% that really can't behave themselves, and ignoring the 95% that we're handling day-to-day living here in Richland County, we tried to flip that prism a little bit. And that's what we continue to endeavor to do. Right now, Richland Source covers local government, business, education, lifestyles, and sports with a team of 4 reporters. And then you alluded to it a little bit earlier, Tim, we've really kind of branched out into solutions journalism and open source, which is journalism that our readers suggest. They use the Harken tool. I don't know if you're all familiar with Harken, but to ask us specific questions, direct questions. Really, this has become very popular in the last calendar year. Actually, we're getting about 3 times as many questions here in the last year as we had before, and a lot of them really insightful. We don't do a story on every suggestion, but we do. We have one up right now, as a matter of fact, about tornado sirens. So our publisher's thought here was that he wanted to do journalism with our audience, not to our audience. And so that's the direction that open source has taken. And they have a wide array of questions and Some of them spark some very interesting answers. And then with solutions journalism, which I did not know anything about. 25 years in the business, I had never heard of solutions journalism. And kind of an interesting story, we turned a piece in early 2016 when I first became managing editor that David Bornstein at the New York Times highlighted as one of the 10 best solution pieces in the country in that year. And I did not know who David Bornstein was, and I did not know what solutions journalism was. All I knew is what our story was. It was about flooding and how to mitigate flooding on farmland here in the Midwest. And then David sent one of his emissaries to Richland Source to talk to us a little bit about how we go about our business, and that's how we were introduced to solutions journalism. And for those who don't know, solutions journalism is kind of taking the next step and not just highlighting a problem, but looking at potential solutions or how they're doing it better somewhere else to address a problem. And that can lead, to looking at places all over the globe, really. We've done stories that highlighted how people are addressing certain issues in San Diego or in Maine, and tried to bring those back here. Not that we're advocating, I want to be very clear, we do not advocate, but we're just trying to expose this community to some new ideas of what's happening elsewhere. So maybe it'll spark an idea, maybe it won't, maybe it'll lead to a solution, maybe it won't, but it's information, it's valuable information, and our funders have loved it. That's largely what our business community has supported us, is on our reputation as a solutions journalism outlet. And so we've been able to attract some national attention. The New York Times, as I mentioned, Columbia School of Journalism, Medill, the Poynter Institute, Christian Science Monitor, Google and Facebook have all been here. We've been to some of their spots to talk about our work in solutions journalism. And we've won several national awards with it. And it's made an impact here, not just, in awards, but in the fact that our community, you could tell our community kind of feels a little differently about itself. And I think we were really gaining some momentum before the pandemic. I think that really kind of knocked us back a little bit, but we're starting to regain that as we come out of the pandemic. And I think our journalism is a little bit of part of that here in the community. I don't know if I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but we have a lot of people talk to us about stories that we do that have made a difference. So that's kind of what we hang our hat on a little bit. As far as our community supporting us, we have a membership program. David will talk more about that. With 1,100 local readers, we're a free online source. We are a for-profit, although that discussion goes back and forth about whether we'll go nonprofit or not. But we have 1,100 local readers who pay a monthly, I don't know, I guess you'd call it a subscription fee, but our site is free. So really what they're doing is supporting our journalism. And, it's a very reasonable price. We'd like to our goal is to get up to 1,500 local readers. Right now it's at 1,100. And then from the business community, we've raised more than $100,000 in each of the last 3 years from the business community, again, to support our journalism work. So we get a lot of irons in the fire. We do a lot of collaboration. We have 2 reporters who just started within the last 2 months from Report for America. They are at Knox Pages and Ashland Source, helping bolster those newsrooms. We partner with an app called ScoreStream to produce some artificial intelligence that handles game coverage for high school sports. That's an entirely different story, but that's something kind of innovative that we're involved in to enhance our coverage too. So we have a lot going on, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I'm sorry, I don't think the slides matched up with my presentation there, but David's a lot better equipped to handle that than I am.
Yes. So David, did you want to go, or should we dive into the questions? Or
happy to do either, Tim. whichever you think makes more sense.
Okay, why don't we just dive in, if that's okay, and then I would remind folks that you can put questions in the Q&A, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. So the Source is really a unique example of community local news in so many different ways. First, of course, is your digital delivery platform. You're not encumbered by the costs of print and distribution. Second, you're reporting local news through a solutions journalism frame, Larry, as you were just describing. And third, you have a highly diversified revenue model. So I'd like to unpack kind of all three of those things. So the question for Larry or David, is being digital only liberating or limiting in North Central Ohio? Is it a competitive advantage or disadvantage? And I did a little bit of research before we got on, and it looks like about 1 in 5 residents in the county there are over the age of 65 and maybe traditional print readers. So could you talk about that a little bit and your digital approach?
Yeah, David, I'll take the content end of it, and you can handle the other side of it. Yeah, you're right, Tim. This is very much an older community. That would be the limitation for us. We do run into people that have never heard of Richland Source that don't have a phone. You know, and we're not going to reach them if they don't have a phone. They're not able to be on a computer. They're not comfortable with a computer. They're afraid of a computer. Yeah, those folks are not our readers. And for being in a limited audience, yes, that can be a challenge. But for the younger audience, we are definitely the go-to site. And as far as content goes, I feel like it's very liberating. You know, as somebody who lived on deadlines for 25 years, you know, we have a shot at going live. You know, as soon as I edit a story, it's live. You know, that's very different than legacy newspapers that, you know, you print. And I mean, we had the capability of doing that at the Mansfield News Journal when I was there, but you had to go through 2 or 3 different people. And if it was a night meeting, it was, well, somebody's got to, you know, okay this on 3 different Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. And it was just a very cumbersome situation compared to what we have. And so from a competitive standpoint, it's very liberating. From a distribution standpoint, you're right. Our audience kind of limits who we can reach. Would you like to add to that, David?
Yeah, it's extremely liberating, I think, on the fact that you, once you add the overhead of print, it's hard to get rid of it. I mean, and a lot of people, and I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of people, I think, around the US, is just print ad revenue especially is just not moving away quickly. So when you're talking about a problem of scarcity in terms of the economics of news, that's a difficult transition. When you start from digital, we had to get very good at it very fast as a function of survival. And I'm grateful to say, despite our learning curve and despite some mistakes, we have done that. It also, I will tell you, coming from 0 in 2013, we were able to make strategic decisions about digital that were very healthy because we were starting from nothing. So there was a lot of streamlining and a lot of building from that point that have really aided us. And to answer your question, does it put us at a market disadvantage? No, actually. Now, consumption's driven by the 35 to 55 demographic. That's spikes number 1. They actually drive about 1 in 5 in consumption. But when you look at 55 to 65 plus, they actually drive in the trailing year 30% of consumption. And my theory is they have high amounts of disposable time. They're not computer illiterate. The world will not let them be computer illiterate. Those who are manage their own way through it. Like Larry said, they may manage it in a limited way compared to a more power user. But the coolest part is this. When we opened up our revenue program to membership, we found they're our most passionate readers. And that counts for things like brand advocacy. It counts for a lot of untrackable things that then show up in market adoption.
Yeah. So I want to pivot to solutions journalism and talk about that. On your website, you describe your approach to news this way, quote, a strong focus on solutions journalism, which at its core is covering the response to a problem by investigating what was done, what worked, what didn't, and why. We've all experienced the fatigue that comes with only reading negative news. It is equally frustrating for us when painstaking coverage of a problem doesn't produce change. But add solutions journalism to the investigation, showing how problems can be solved, and you can find that the usual excuses just won't cut it. Change happens. By adding rigorous coverage of solutions, we can tell the whole story. So talk to me a little bit about that, and how did you decide to take this solutions journalism frame?
Well, probably our most famous solution journalism story was on the baby boxes. There was a politician coming through Mansfield 5 years ago who mentioned, actually had an erroneous stat, that Richland County was one of the two worst counties in Ohio. There's 88 counties in Ohio. One of the two worst counties in Ohio for infant mortality. And so we kind of seized on that stat and, wondered, why is that? And what we did is looked at it from a solutions journalism perspective. And we ended up looking at some different places in the country and how they're dealing with this, and landed on a place in California. And I'm sorry, it's been 5 years ago, so I don't remember the city. But it had a program that produced baby boxes for expectant mothers so that the local hospital would be able to give them to the mothers when they left the hospital with their newborn. The box itself could be used as like a bassinet kind of situation. It was stuffed full of toiletries and everything you would need for a newborn, to take care of a newborn for probably about a month. And so we looked at that program and then made a conscious effort to put together what we called a community baby shower right here in our newsroom, and invited the community to come on down, register with us, give us your email address, and come on in and we'll present you with a baby box. We got 500 baby boxes from this company in California, and the local hospital got involved. Our newsroom was jammed. We had a line down the block of expectant mothers and sometimes their family members. And it was a fantastic success. Solutions Journalism Network out of New York came to Mansfield to see it. And it was just one of those situations where, again, we're not advocating. We were just looking at an idea. This is how this community is handling it in California that was a like size to ours. For us, you've had folks on from Detroit and Chicago earlier today. How they handle a problem, how Mansfield, Ohio handles a problem are really apples to oranges. So we wanted to look at some community that's really closer to what we're capable of. And so I think that helps too. That it helps our readers understand that, we're not looking at pie in the sky solutions here. It kind of not giving our elected officials an easy out by saying, oh yeah, well, sure, they can do that in Phoenix. This is Mansfield, Ohio, So we're trying to think like that, be thoughtful about what we look at, and really just present an idea is really the goal of solutions journalism.
So Larry, just to drill down a little bit, when you're conceiving stories with the staff, with the reporters, how does that conversation go when you're thinking about tailoring a story towards solutions journalism? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, good example is last fall, we had what we call a listening tour, where we went to each of the sectors in our community and just had a 1 hour meeting. We had coffee and sat down, and elected officials were invited, but were not allowed to speak. And we said, we're happy to have you. You don't get to talk. This is the community's chance to talk. And we didn't talk. We asked the readers, tell us what your concern is in this particular neighborhood. And we went to 6 different places here in Mansfield. And then we did it in Knox Pages and Ashland Source. And then we compiled those thoughts together. And now this spring, we have begun addressing those specific concerns. in Knox County, the concern is the homeless population and how it's kind of bleeding into the downtown region of Mount Vernon, Ohio. In Mansfield here, we're talking about housing shortage, affordable living. I don't know how much you're aware. Intel has announced a huge plant that's scheduled to go in here in central Ohio. There will be 12 miles south of Knox County, which it borders Richland County, but it is going to impact us dramatically. And we do not have the housing right now to address that. So we're looking at those particular stories in those particular regions, and it's directly from the readers. So when you say, you know, how do we decide we're going to go deep on something, right there's a perfect example. Hey, this is top of mind for our readers. So we're going to look at in the Intel situation, you know, we're looking at where they've been in Chandler, Arizona. There's a community in Oregon where Intel has been as well, and see how those communities handled it, what they did to address this huge influx of people that has developed in their community, and see if we can learn from what they did right, what they did wrong, and what they would do differently. So that's kind of an example of you know, what and when we decide to go deep on something, and then and then sometimes it just happens, Tim. You know, you're a journalist, you know that sometimes you just get jacked up by the story, and the next thing you know, you're there. And we had that happen with our sports writer here. He did a story last week, as a matter of fact, where the local General Motors plant went out of business here in Mansfield in 2010. So Kurt Conrad is our sports reporter's name. He was doing a story on the local recreation league had put in turf fields at 7 or 8 fields in their park, their big park, Marshall Park. And it has turned into a monstrous revenue generator in the community, because they have hundreds of teams coming in every summer now to play baseball, softball on these turf fields because they're weather resistant. It's no problem. And it has, I wouldn't say it's covered the absence of GM, but it has helped address what could have been a catastrophe. And now they have, they've just pivoted towards something very different to kind of address their situation. And Kurt just fell into that story. And I called him at 10:30 at night. I said, Kurt, you realize you have a solution story here? He goes, which story? And so we were talking about it. He goes, hey, yeah, you want me to call the mayor tomorrow? I said, yes, please. And it just kind of went from there. So, you know, inspiration can come from anywhere.
Yeah, that's a great example. You're absolutely right. Absolutely. So in the 7 minutes or so we have remaining, David, I want to talk about the business side of the source, which has one of the most diversified business models that I've seen for a news organization your size. And we're going to talk about diversification in the next case study as well. But so you have an in-house digital ad marketing agency. You have individual membership program. You have a corporate membership program. You have grant and gift funding from foundations and companies. And as I think Larry alluded to earlier, and then you even developed and operate an AI tool for sports coverage. So, wow. Talk about kind of how you did pull all those sources together and how that works.
Yeah, if you want to understand Source Media and Richland Source and what we do, there's 2 words that come to mind: entrepreneurism and intrapreneurism, as 2 distinct things. One is there has to be a rather fearless attitude about what we do. And in fact, if you still have the slides, the one slide that says which line of revenue is best, could we throw that back up? Because I think it captures the spirit of what I'm about to say. We're encouraged as employees to better what we do all the time. And so which line of revenue is best? Well, all of it is the joke I've told internally. But we're really built on 4 primary revenue streams. And those 4 are, as you see on the slide, number 1 is display advertising and sponsorships. That's number 1 for us still. And it's going to continue to be for some time, just because we're experiencing growth in that year. It's what we optimize, it's what we build. And by the way, we have just a tremendous sales team. When I think of what Audrey, Leah, and Haley all do for our sales team, it's one of the best sales teams I've worked with, number one. I say that without reservation. But two, the way they educate themselves on the product and take it to market and simplify a complex product for the market, that's been our secret to success there. Marketing services, we primarily focus on handling people's marketing portfolio in a small business. If they need that service, we provide it. We also do content development, web development, things adjacent to what we do for Source Media. We sell as a service on our side of the house, if you will. Newsroom Partners in Philanthropy. Newsroom Partners is the name of the corporate program where we open up for donations. That makes up, that makes up another 21%. So just review what we've talked about. Advertising is 35%, marketing services is 27%. The philanthropy side is 21%. Membership makes up 17%, and we're investing in growing that slice of the pie. But that's more of a long-term effort. So when you look at how do you launch a website in one of the poorer areas of Ohio, it's not the poorest by any stretch, but it's on the bottom half of the 88, and all three of them on different parts of it. Their populations respectively of 120K in Richland County. Ashland to the east is about 50, and Knox to the south is roughly 60. These are small territories. We run out of people to serve. We run out of members to attain. I believe we have sought out revenue diversification because we saw the writing on the wall that there was only so much advertising you could sell, right? And so when we looked at what we wanted to be and what we wanted to serve, this is where revenue diversification became extremely important for us, is we knew that we had to expand the revenue pie. So we did so, and we started that effort really in about 2016. It extended and went aggressive in about 17, 18. And now what we're seeing is about 5 years of investment in all three of those additional channels to advertising. But we are what I would refer to as agnostic to which one is best. And that drives a spirit of constantly improving inside of each one of those. And like Larry said, one of the things that I think has made us successful is, even though we refer to it as two sides of the house, we refer to having a picket fence between us. And that means I can give Larry feedback and Larry can give me feedback. And we both take very seriously news integrity and revenue sustainability at the same level. I know Larry has my back for revenue. I know he's going to respect things I do on the business side. And Larry knows I will never jeopardize his newsroom's integrity, ever. We will walk away from dollars. And that, as a commitment, is something I think essential when you start diversifying this, because we do have a lot of different conversations, but nobody dictates what we write, even though they may donate heavily to it. They know upfront that is a term of donation. Advertisers know that we will let them walk. There are no threats leveled. And by the way, all parties we deal with, we've been very fortunate in that a rural community who wasn't given a whole lot of breaks responded to us very well. And we have a very positive relationship with them.
That's really great and inspirational. I might add. So I want to squeeze in one more quick question before we move to North Carolina. But to ask the question I've been asking the others, is it possible that other smaller market, local news publishers could replicate your journalism and business model? What do you think?
For sure, our journalism, yes, that's, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel here. You know, we did learn about solutions journalism, but the Solutions Journalism Network is very open about incorporating more newsrooms. It is unique to our audience, but I think it's growing in popularity throughout the country. So I would say absolutely, from an editorial standpoint, David could speak much more coherently to the other side.
Yeah, and I'm a believer in diversification to the fact I'll say assertively, I think people should, especially if they're in our situation. I think it applies to all sizes. Here's why. For years, my perspective on journalism has been that we have tried to find the one size fits all model for revenue. Like what's the secret code? And what I believe we have learned in that is just as your journalism has to be tailored to the territory and the people you serve, the real human beings, so does your revenue. There are unique and distinct advantages each market holds. I think newsrooms have to be very open to the idea of letting the market drive that. That's a little bit scary, frankly, because it changes the way you do business. You have to be the hard worker in that equation. You have to make the ask, you have to make the adjustments. But a resort town in Moab, Utah, has very different economics than we do. And I just spoke to an awesome entrepreneur in Moab, Utah yesterday. So that's why it's top of mind. But the spirit of what we both landed on and where we unify our efforts is we're both trying to tailor something both in content and revenue that fits. And that's something that may not scale, but the activity does. The universal root activity of, okay, I need to talk to my market on both the editorial side and the revenue side creates an abundance of opportunities that I don't think we will ever have enough time to truly monetize.
Right. Before we go, David, my friend Paul Ellis is asking in the Q&A, do you have a media background? She's curious to know whether your background is in media.
Yeah, I actually come from PR.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, I come from Ohio State's PR office. So I think one of the things that was unique about when we started, we hired a bunch of green people and a bunch of people from different backgrounds. That helped us in this sense. We didn't know enough to know what was the right thing to do. So we had to figure it out. And in terms of what I do, I found my way to the business side because I really like the entrepreneurism. And I was able to, they let me build an ad network that now numbers, we're on track to do about 100 million ad impressions. And they allowed me the latitude, they being Carl and Jay, allowed me the latitude to figure that out. And man, it's been, I don't think I could do the stress of the 10 years parts of it, but I would do the 10 years all over again. And the reason why is because when we bring people in, one of the coolest compliments we got the other day when we welcomed a new reporter is a former employee chimed in on Twitter and said, hey, unprompted, didn't have to, said this is one of the most welcoming and awesome cultures you're going to be a part of. You enjoy that. That's what they told unsolicited to a new reporter. And that meant a lot. One is because we have a great relationship with that individual. And then two, this really is a people-driven model. You can't fake caring about your market. And that's what I love about news is we are driven by mission. And when people see that, the money is nearly impossible not to follow. And that's what I love on the business side. It makes my job fairly easy on that side.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't fake caring about your market. And I think we saw that in the example of the Outlier media in Detroit as well. So Larry and David, thank you so much for your time this morning and for sharing your experiences at the Source. We wish you all the best going forward, and at Medill we'll be following your success there. So good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we go from one David to another. And from the Midwest to the South. And I'd like to welcome David Woronoff. David has been president and publisher of the Pilot newspaper in Southern Pines, North Carolina for the past 26 years. Very impressive tenure there under his leadership. The Pilot's been named the best community newspaper in the nation, not the state, in the nation, 5 times by either the Inland Press Association or the newspaper, the National Newspaper Association. In addition, he's transformed the pilot from a twice weekly newspaper into a true statewide media company. David was named the president of the North Carolina Press Association back in 2010. And I'm excited to have David here today to talk to us about his incredible work really in diversifying revenue and how he's been able to grow at a time when a lot of local news organizations have been contracting. So David, take it away, and then we'll dive into questions.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Tim. Thanks for having me here. It's always nice to get to share our story. Well, here in the Sand Hills of North Carolina, this is right at our front door of our building, which was an old grocery store way back when. I think it was an A&P. We're right in the middle of downtown Southern Pines, and you see at the top of that wall is the pilot. So 26 years ago, that was 100% of our business, and now all these years later, we're all these other things all over North Carolina. So if you go to the next state, I'll try and get you located as to where we are. You can see the green county there, that's Moore County. We are in the geographic center of North Carolina. And you see the red dot to the northeast of us is the state capital of Raleigh. It's about an hour away. And then the due north of us, the sort of Carolina blue dot is Greensboro. That's the third largest city in North Carolina. And that's about an hour due north. And then the purple dot to due west of Moore County, that's Charlotte, the largest city in the state. What we are famous for here in Pinehurst, if you haven't heard of us, is we are the home of American golf. There are 43 golf courses within 10 miles of my office. Golfer Tom Watson once said to some people, excuse me, to some people, golf's a matter of life or death. But to the people of Pinehurst, it's really much more important than that. So we like to say everybody here is in the golf business, whether you know it or not. For instance, just last month, the U.S. Women's Open was held here in Southern Pines, about a mile down the road from here. And so you see the picture there of Minjee Lee, the Australian phenom who won the tournament, or the championship, I should say. And then immediately about a mile in the other direction is Fort Bragg. And Fort Bragg is the largest Army installation in the country in terms of land area. So it is, Fayetteville is a significantly large city. It's about 45 miles away, and Fort Bragg is the entire distance between us and Fayetteville. So provides a nice buffer. So we're blessed here with geographic isolation. We're a relatively affluent rural community with all the golf and tourism. But you go 2 miles in any direction and we are hard scrabble rural poverty. But you see that's Martin Keimer, who won the 2014 US Open here at Pinehurst, and that's the Carolina Hotel. Pinehurst was founded in 1895 as a winter retreat for wealthy Northeastern folk. So Pinehurst and Southern Pines sit cheek by jowl. As Pinehurst is to golf, Southern Pines is to equestrian activities. So you see the picture down at the bottom, that's Thanksgiving Day, that's the blessing of the hounds. And Southern Pines, it's quite a lot of pageantry around that. In the winter, Southern Pines is famous for its equestrian pursuits. We have a 4,000 acre equestrian preserve, and then horse countries ring that property. And so on that 4,000 acres, the public is welcome to use it, but they must be on horseback. We are, as you can see in the slide, the US Open and the US Women's Open is a big deal to us. We're the first anchor site for the US Open. And for those of you who do not know golf, the US Open is the largest golf tournament in the world. There are 300 and some thousand people come to Pinehurst for the golf tournament. or the championship, I should say. It's America's National Golf Championship. So we'll have it every 5 or 6 years going forward. We have 3,000 hotel rooms in our community. So we're the only rural site that hosts the US Open. We are, the topography of our area is important. We are called the Sand Hills. So 100 million years ago, we were beachfront property, and the undulating terrain that we enjoy are the remnants of ancient sand dunes. And because of that, there was very little agricultural value to the property. So when this part of the world was settled, nobody wanted to live here because you couldn't farm it. And the pine straw was so thick from the pine trees that the wagons couldn't get across it. So it was just sort of the pine barrens. Well, it turns out the two things you can grow in the sandhills are pine trees and grass. So we have used that to carve out our living. So that's sort of where we are. A couple on the next slide, if you could forward that. That's just a little picture of our offices. We are at our heart, a twice weekly community newspaper. And the way you know you're in a community newspaper as opposed to a metropolitan one is there are dogs and babies around. And so if you see on the bottom row, you see the 4 little guys sitting there with our office dog Scout, checking them out. He's the most fair weather friend you will ever have. Scout will pay you no attention. However, if you have food, he is your best friend. And so I'm sure Scout she's hanging out there because she thinks one of these little fellows is gonna drop something her way. Just above that, you'll see the 3 ladies in a row. That is our ad department. And that is, you notice the slogan on the wall, advertising makes possible the free press. We want every employee to think that their work matters. And so in the ad department, a lot of times the glory all goes to the newsroom, and we want to make sure the ad reps share in that sense of purpose. And so we want to make sure they know they're not just out there schlepping space, that they're out there furthering the cause of democracy. And so we put that on the wall and make sure they feel just as a part and committed to our journalistic pursuits as the folks in the newsroom. On the bottom slide, or the bottom of this slide, you'll see 3 fellows look as 2 photographers and our sports editor, and you'll see a different slogan on the wall. I think that's from a Chicago news outlet. That it's a newspaper's duty to raise hell and print the news. Well, yeah, so they're in there, a little slightly different slogan, but again, making, kind of building that esprit de corps in our news operation. If you go to the next slide, this is, so 26 years ago, we were 100% newspaper, and we set very purposefully a course 26 years ago to diversify our revenue. So now you can see the pilot is 26% of our revenue. Magazines are about a little over half. Then along the way, we bought the local bookstore, we started a phone book, and we started a digital ad agency. So that's the revenue breakdown there. Basically, if 100% of your business gets sick, you're in a world of hurt. But if 25%, 26% of your business gets sick, you can survive that. So that's what we've set out to do. You go to the next slide. This is, I have to say, I feel a little bit like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. I thought y'all might see this as sort of the ramblings of a deranged newspaper publisher. But this is all of our products. And I used to think of the pilot as the sun and all of our other properties as planets orbiting around it. And I've since come to realize that I was wrong in that, and that our what we really are is a series of solar systems. And if you could go to the next slide, you'll see this is the pilot, which is the most developed. And so we have the newspaper in the center, but we also have our monthly. Here's what our newspaper looks like. This is Sunday's paper. It's 74 pages this week, and you like the lead story there. The World Golf Hall of Fame is coming back to Pinehurst. that, we feel like having a big, thick product lands with a thud, and that's 50% advertising. It lands with a thud on your doorstep. That is compelling to read. Pine Straw Magazine, our monthly magazine, this is 124 pages, 15,000 circulation. We put out 15,000 of them. They're gone by the 10th of the month. It's free circulation. Frequently getting calls about where can they get one. Here's our telephone directory. Hard to believe in this day in 2022, we're still publishing a phone book, but we are. And it's got the women's open on the cover, so it's kind of fun. 50,000 copies, and we have a large retirement community, and that's, every year we say, okay, this is the last year we're going to do the phone book, and the sales reps go out and sell enough to keep printing it. So we do that. On the right of the pilot, you'll see some of our digital offerings. So the briefing is our daily email newsletter. It goes to 22,000 folks in a market of 100,000 with a pretty nice open rate of almost half. The Sway is our twice weekly millennials newsletter. It's incredibly well received. I just checked that this morning. They're at almost 19,000 subscribers and still north of 50% on the open rate. The Country Bookshop, and we'll get into that later, but that was an acquisition of the heart, not the mind, and that has proven to be a lucrative one, and a one that always makes deposits in our Goodwill checking account. We have 100 author events a year, so averaging 2 a week. Of those 100 author events, 14 of them were New York Times bestsellers. Go to the next slide. We acquired Business North Carolina magazine about 7 years ago, and that really changed how we viewed ourselves. And it propelled our ambition to be a statewide media company. And so we, instead of thinking of ourselves as a little 2-day-a-week country newspaper, we now view ourselves as a statewide media company with a 2-day-a-week newspaper as its beating heart. But Business North Carolina, 30,000 subscribers, CEOs mailed directly to them across the state, averaging 80 some pages an issue. We got into the events business with that, and we have several events tied in here. And then to be a statewide media company, we thought, well, Business North Carolina is in Charlotte, but it is not of Charlotte. And we really need to really be deeper in that market. And if you're going to be a statewide media company, you got to be in the 3 largest cities. That's probably 70% of North Carolina's population is in and around Charlotte, Greensboro, and Raleigh. So we went to Raleigh and tried to buy a magazine from the Raleigh newspaper, which is owned by McClatchy. And they didn't want to sell it, but they said, but we got this magazine in Charlotte, we'll sell you. So we, you got to take the opportunities when they come your way. So we said, well, we know we're going to have to be in Charlotte at some point. So we bought South Park, and we've since almost doubled revenues to South Park Magazine, which is a monthly arts and culture magazine in a very affluent part of Charlotte. And then, sure enough, a couple years later, the NNO came back to us and said, hey, could you go to the next slide? Said they'll come back to you and we'll sell you Walter Magazine, which is a similar magazine covering our state capital. O. Henry, so Walter is named for the Englishman, Sir Walter Raleigh, whom the capital city is named. O. Henry is named for the early 20th century short story writer William Sidney Porter, who is a native of Greensboro. For those of you who remember from your high school English, O. Henry, his masterpiece was A Gift of the Magi. So, and that is, well, he wrote that in New York City. That is said to be based on people he knew at his father's pharmacy in downtown Greensboro. So Tim, that is all of our stuff. And happy to answer your questions and go from here.
Thank you, David. And by the way, I wholeheartly support dogs in the office. I think that's a great that's a great thing.
I gotta tell you, Tim, I should have done that a lot earlier in my career, because when community newspaper, when folks, you're accessible. We pride ourselves on being accessible. When these readers come in cussing mad at us, when nothing takes down the temperature, when Scout come and put his head in your lap and he kind of calms everybody down. So, a good thing for newspaper folk out there.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, and I hope Scout defends you as well when need be. So the thing is so intriguing, and you've had a lot of success journalistically too. But on the business side is this diversification model of yours, and what do you think would have happened had you not diversified in the way that you have?
Well, I would say this, Tim, that all of my friends who had standalone community newspapers at least across the South, I don't know a whole lot outside of the South, they're all out of the industry. They've all
Really?
sold. Yeah, they're just not there anymore. I think I have one or two friends, you go to an industry trade group and you're kind of standing in the corner talking to each other, and all the hedge fund owned newspapers are talking to each other. So I think without diversifying it, you just are not. It's hard to be a standalone newspaper and to be able to have the overhead necessary to employ everybody and still make it a going concern. So you've got to find a way to finance your journalism by stretching that overhead over multiple revenue streams.
And David, do you think this is something that other publishers like yourself can do? Are you at a unique market because you're such a tourist and golf attraction area, or can this be done elsewhere?
I would say yes to both. Yes, we're only as good as our markets. So we are fortunate that we serve a very vibrant one. However, I think diversifying within your market is absolutely essential, and you won't survive unless you do it. And so can everybody else do it? Absolutely. It's just a matter of, setting your mind to it and making it happen. So
what would you say to publishers who would say, well, gosh, things are going great for you, but it's too risky. It might be too risky for me to try this strategy. What would you say to them?
I would say the far greater risk is to do nothing. If you just sit tight and say, you know what, I only know the newspaper business and I'm only going to be in the newspaper business, or I only own a standalone radio station, the clock is ticking on you, and your time's going to expire, and you're not going to be, somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say you can't do this anymore. Whether that's the banker or the owner, but somebody's going to say we're not going to fund that.
And David, yeah, I think that's right. And could you talk about the other benefits of diversification? So for example, you've been able to create an advertising network across now several of your publications. I assume you're able to save back office costs, and you're able to conserve expenses that way. But could you talk about some of the other benefits of diversification?
Well, first of all, it gives you more scale. First of all, second of all, it's just, I think it's, for us as a tourist market, our customers will quickly tell you half of their business comes from outside of the area. So if the old expression, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Mm-hmm. Well, if the only tool you have is the newspaper, then the solution to all of your community's information and marketing needs is going to be more newspaper. Well, as the three previous speakers have illustrated very well, that's just not true. So so for us to go, we need to go to our community and say, we've got a whole smorgasbord of offerings for you. I think having the multiple revenue streams, it gives you multiple touches to the market. It gives you, and then you're able to market across those. So we have, for instance, we have a little ticketing platform, so community events, somebody's having a fundraising gala. Well, we can sell their online tickets for them and collect the money and oh, by the way, collect their email address. And then while we're doing that, we're saying, would you like to get our millennial newsletter? Would you like to get our daily news report? Would you like to receive our statewide business report? And suddenly it's a great email acquisition tool for all of our other products. So
yeah, that's really important.
So sort of the one hand washes the other, so to speak. That's, I think, a real advantage. And it also, at least for most of their history, newspapers were about market dominance. And we just don't dominate the market like we used to with just the newspaper. But by adding all these other products, we still can move the market in a way that no other media operation in our community can.
And David, could you talk just briefly about what the impact has been on the pilot of the diversification strategy? So has it enabled you to keep the newsroom about the same size or even grow the newsroom? Is the pilot still, you had your different solar systems.
Yes.
in your presentation, the pilot's not at the center of the solar system anymore, as you were saying, but could you talk about what the impact has been on the pilot and the newspaper itself?
Absolutely. Great question, Tim. The pilot newsroom, I think at our peak, in 99, 2004 or 5, something, pre-Great Recession, I think we had 12 or 13 reporters, or newsroom staffers. We're at 11 and a half today. And just this morning, the managing editor was lobbying me for another person. Which I think I surprised her and said, well, I'm a little worried about what might be coming down the path, come November, December, but I didn't say no to the expansion of another reporter. So the pilot, because of all this, is far more robust than it would be otherwise. Putting out and so one way the newspaper is benefited is we now sell all of our advertising is sold. I went to the University of North Carolina. I realized that you're a Big Ten school, but we're a good ACC school and basketball is king, and I'm a Tar Heel. So we call it our TAR rate, which is total area reach. And so all of our ads are sold, where we bundle a full page ad with, we sell impressions on the website, about 10,000. And then we bundle in the daily newsletter. So all that gets sold together. The millennial newsletter, the Sway and the monthly magazine are so popular, we're able to sell those separately. But by bundling, that makes the newspaper far more relevant. And I think in this media environment, relevance is the coin of the realm. And so being relevant to our advertisers and relevant to our readers, we feel like we have a nice virtuous circle.
Yeah, well, I think you do. And you have a very robust circle going as well. So we don't have a question in the Q&A, but we do have a comment, again, from my friend Paul Ellis, who says, thanks, David. I was in the biz for a long time and was co-author of a recently published textbook, News for Us, Citizen-Centered Journalism. We introduced the idea of relational journalism. I'm very interested in what you all are doing. My best, Paula Ellis. So great comment there from Paula.
Thank you. I don't know what relational journalism is, but it sounds like community journalism. Would that be?
Yeah.
Which is, I would argue, we do that. One of the hardest things for me when we went to Greensboro, I always thought of myself as little small town newspaper publisher, and nobody, you know, and the sophisticates in the big city would kind of laugh at us. And what we found is that the people in the big city aren't any different than the people in the country, and they just have a little bit more money, but they're not any different, and they want to belong to something that matters, and they want to be a part of something that celebrates community and isn't afraid to do it. You know, so I like to say a good community newspaper isn't afraid to tell its community that he loves it. But at the same time, you know, sometimes you gotta, you know, like any parent, you gotta sometimes scold the unruly child. And maybe, you know, when you catch them doing something that, you know, they ought not to be doing, you gotta be willing to put that on the front page. But you're also going to celebrate all the accomplishments, and you're not going to be, you're not going to stifle that. So I like to say we're probably 90% refrigerator journalism, which means that 90% of what we print gets cut out and stuck on the refrigerator somewhere. And 10% we're spinach journalism, which is, you're not going to like the way this tastes, but eat it because it's good for you. And you know, and we do that in the newspaper, in the 4 sort of arts and culture magazines. I'd call them home on the range publications. You know, they're sort of seldom is heard a discouraging word. Our business magazine is much like the newspaper. It's far more newsy, and if you know, if the news isn't very positive, the news isn't very positive. We don't, you know, we still publish it that way. I don't know if that answered the question or comment, but that's what we do.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know for our friends on the East Coast that it's lunchtime, so I don't want to stand between you and lunch. David, I want to thank you so much again for taking the time to be with us this morning, and for really being an inspiration, I think for many publishers around the country who are looking to grow revenue. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you're able to enjoy those golf courses down there.
Oh, thank you. Well, we'd love to have you down here anytime you want to come.
All right, thank you. And a quick final word before we go. This is being recorded, and we will be posting this on YouTube and on the Medill YouTube channel. So you will be able to go back and refer to it there. We're also going to be publishing a report on the Medill Local News Initiative website. So if you Google Local News Initiative or Medill Local News Initiative, you will come to our site at Medill at Northwestern. And within the next couple of weeks, we'll have a report published that details and highlights some of what you heard today. So the Medill Local News Initiative is all about fostering a conversation about local news sustainability, and we hope that we've done that and achieved that here this morning. I want to thank my colleagues, Stacy Simpson and Matt Schrock, for helping us this morning behind the scenes. And also want to again thank the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung USA for its support of this webinar and for its support of the Medill Local News Initiative over the past several years. So thank you again for being with us, and we will look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you and best of luck.